Gentlemen, please shall we rise for the national anthem? And let's all stand at attention as much as we can. The national anthem, please.
Nigeria, we hail thee, our own dear native land. Though tribe and tongue may differ, in brotherhood we stand. Nigerians old and proud to serve our sovereign fatherland. Our flag shall be a symbol that truth and justice reign. In peace or battle honored, and this we count as gain. To hang on to our children a banner without stain. O God of all creation, grant this our one request. Help us to build a nation where no man is oppressed, and so with peace and plenty, Nigeria may be blessed.
Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you. Thank you once again. My name is Babajide Benson. Welcome to the launching of the NESG Macroeconomic Outlook Report for 2026 with the theme Consolidating Economic Stabilization Gains, Pathway to Sustainable Growth in Nigeria. Just a quick rundown of the agenda. We're going to take opening remarks by the chairman of the NESG, Mr. Ni Yusuf, right after which the chief economist, Dr. Umi Shakun, will make a presentation of the outlook for 2026. After that, we will proceed to officially launch the report, and we'll take a keynote speech by the Honorable Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy. We'll have a panel session right after that, made up of eminent persons who know their onions. And we will come to you, the audience, to ask some of the questions that have been bugging your mind. After that, we will have an outlook on industrial developments in Nigeria based on the new National Industrial Policy. And that's one of the reasons why we have the Honorable Minister of State for Industry, Trade, and Investments. And we'll also have a policy address from him after that, and we will launch the December inflation reports. We'll come back to you one more time for questions, and we'll take closing remarks from the CEO of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group. It's now my pleasure, therefore, to invite for his opening remarks the chairman of the NESG, Mr. Ni Yusuf.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Honorable ministers, heads of ministries, departments, and agencies of government, captains of industry, directors of the NESG, members of the international community, other members of the NESG, members of the press, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It gives me immense pleasure, or first, Happy New Year, actually. It's still January, and this is our first convening this year. So we all pray for a joyous, successful, and fulfilling 2026. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this 2026 Macroeconomic Outlook launch, organized by the Research Department of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group. The timing of this launch is deliberate. The report is not intended as a forecast in isolation, but as a strategic lens through which to assess where the Nigeria economy stands today, how far we have come, and what the next phase of reform must deliberately achieve. Nigeria has just emerged from one of the disruptive adjustment periods in its recent economic history. At the NESG, we framed the reform journey through a stabilization, consolidation, and acceleration continuum. And we think what we've done now is stabilization, and we now need to focus on consolidation. Economic transformation is not just an event. It is a sequenced and perpetual progress. Skipping steps may come at a cost, and confusing one phase for another may lead to policy inconsistency and reform fatigue. The Nigerian economy in 2024 to 2025 was defined by adjustments and corrections. Major structural reforms were undertaken to address long-standing distortions in the foreign exchange market, in energy pricing, and of course, in terms of monetary conditions. These reforms were not painless, but they were unavoidable. They represented the stabilization phase of our reform journey. Stabilization, as we know, is not a temporary fix. It is the foundational phase focused on restoring macroeconomic stability and also reducing systemic volatility. In Nigeria's context, this meant confronting inflationary pressures, exchange rate instability, and of course, fiscal imbalances in order to maintain a floor for robust economic activity. Drawing on the performance of the economy in 2025, important signals of stabilization has begun to emerge. Nigeria's macroeconomic conditions reflected a gradual transition from reform-induced dislocation towards stabilization, though there are structural weaknesses. Real GDP growth strengthened to 3.8% in the first 9 months of last year, up from 3.2% in the same period of 2024, with quarterly momentum improving mid-year. Growth remains services-driven, with the sector accounting for nearly 60% of GDP, led by financial services, transport, and ICT. However, trade activities underperformed, reflecting weakened household purchasing power. Industrial output accelerated to nearly 5% growth, supported by oil and gas recovery and construction activities, but manufacturing remains subdued, largely constrained by high energy costs, FX assets, and tightening financing. Agriculture recorded a modest recovery, though output remains below potential due to insecurity, logistics costs, and input inflation. Following the rebasing of the headline inflation moderated sharply, falling from over 33% in 2024 to around 21% in 2025, supported by exchange rate stabilization, a slowdown in administered prices, particularly fuel costs and other factors. FS market conditions improved, supported by policy reforms, elevated interest rates, and reserves accretion, and of course, reduced petroleum imports. The external balance strengthened, though largely through import compression rather than export diversification. Capital inflows rebounded during the year, driven mainly by portfolio investment, while FDI remains weak, underscoring our unresolved structural and productivity constraints. Monetary policy stayed restrictive, supporting stability, but continuing to weigh on real sector credit and investment. So the picture that emerges therefore suggests that the economy has moved away from acute macroeconomic dislocation towards a more predictable environment. The key question before us, therefore, is no longer whether reform is necessary, but rather, how do we consolidate the gains already achieved and convert them into sustainable inclusive growth. However, stabilization alone does not equate to prosperity. Growth remains modest and uneven, driven by a narrow set of sectors with weak transmission to employment and to household incomes. Real purchasing power remains under pressure, and welfare outcomes continue to lag behind macro indicators. These realities underscore a critical point. Stability is a necessary condition for growth, but it is not sufficient. So this brings us to the central thesis of the 2026 NESG Macroeconomic Outlook, with the question, how do we consolidate things that we have achieved to reflect in the metrics of welfare outcomes for the average citizen? Consolidation to us is a medium-term transition stage where achieved stability must be fortified and translated into productivity gains across the economy. It is a structural bridge between reforms and results. And in this phase, the reduction in macroeconomic disruption must be deliberately leveraged to remove bottlenecks that constrain output, investment, and competitiveness. For Nigeria, consolidation requires a shift in emphasis. Policy must move from inconsistency across sectors to that of coherence, from firefighting to system building, from short-term fixes to institutional strengthening. The 2026 Macroeconomic Outlook highlights several pillars critical to successful consolidation and places strong emphasis on sequencing discipline and also on realism. Reform fatigue is a real risk, but reform reversal will be far more costly. So we all have to stay the course. The challenge before us, therefore, is how we must stay the course while refining and strengthening the quality of implementation. At the NESG, we remain committed to playing the role of a trusted partner in this process. We will continue to provide evidence-based analysis, convene constructive public-private dialogue, and track reform outcomes with intellectual honesty. Let me conclude with this thought. Nigeria has made difficult choices to stabilize its economy. The task ahead is to ensure that these choices and our sacrifices translate into opportunities, productivity, and shared prosperity. Consolidation is the hard work of turning reform into results for all. It is fitting that today's launch of the 2026 Macroeconomic Outlook is also being used for the soft launch of the National Industrial Policy by the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, and also we will have remarks by the Statistician General and the launch of the December inflation report. These two events are indication of the partnership between the NESG and the public sector. We hope that this year's Macroeconomic Outlook event will help facilitate discussions on reforms and actions required to translate reforms into results this year and for subsequent years, so that we can consolidate our economic outcomes and also lay a strong foundation for economic acceleration. I wish us all fruitful deliberations, and thank you all for your commitment to the transformation of the Nigerian economy, and may God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
May God indeed bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Reform fatigue is a real risk, but reform reversal is far worse. That's my key takeaway from Mr. Yusuf's speech. We can't afford to turn back the hands of time. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the presence of our online guests. We don't take it for granted. Quick rundown. Aisha Dabo, Ali Saleh, Alice Jabugbe, Alista Bull, we recognize you, Anastasia Nebulisa, Awal Dabo, Buhari Alpha, Daniel Kayode, Dimeji Ladipo, Dotun Balogun, Dr. James Abalaka, Efyong Akpan, and Gaswind Enterprises. We recognize all of you. We recognize Olubukola, Moronkola, Ola Sonny, Ola Dele Ujo, Paul James, Peter Sharafa Ayola, Sedifi, Timitokwe Julius, Tengi George Ikoli, Toby, Torira, Arile Wala, Yankes Ekanem, and Yusuf Hassan Wada. Thank you all very much. We acknowledge your presence by being with us online. Ladies and gentlemen, the Outlook presentation for 2026, Dr. Olusegun Omishakin, Chief Economist and Director of Research.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. All protocols observed. I think in addition to what the chairman presented, the question that we will be very ready to look at is where do we go from here? I remember in 2023, we were right here in the midst of economic crisis. And the major question we were looking at then was, what do we do to turn things around? In 2024, at the NESG, we also developed a framework to track our progress. The framework is not just about telling us the data on the macro or other sectoral, but to track our progress and to reveal where we are likely going to land. We think this will be very important for policy monitoring, and it will be very important for us to develop something that is robust and that projects as to where the vision is. We are happy, but the challenge now is that we are no more in a state of crisis, as referenced by the chairman. But then the present situation gives us the opportunity to look critically as to how do we optimize the gains we've seen so far, and how will this help us to launch from where we're staying before and to the goal we're looking at. So obviously we are in a consolidation period. Let's put it this way. Pre-2023 till late 2023, we were in a case as a nation where what to do then seems to be very, very huge. There were different ideas throwing, people were suggesting so many things that we could do as a nation to move forward. Currently, now we're in 2024 to 2025, different policy implementations and reforms that were, experimented with during this period began to manifest. So we see some gains in 2025, especially. Now we are in 2026. We are in the consolidation phase. The idea of consolidation phase is not to say we are totally out of the macro instability, because we know that depending on how we look at instability or stability could, also affect how we interpret our current situation. Yes, we have recorded massive gains when it comes to the current state of the macroeconomy. Yes, we have registered evident economic gains, whether we look at it from the productive capacity as a nation, our real GDP, whether we look at it from the inflation control, or we look at it from the foreign reserves, our ability to manage our FX volatility, and indeed the exchange rate stability. We've put all these things out to show that these are headlines. We have currently some challenges, but this is worth celebrating. But the question is not just about what we have gained. The question is also about how do we work on the gains and move forward beyond here. And then so we are looking at 2026 as a very strategic year for government and for policymakers, and indeed for business environment, to say there are 3 areas or 4 areas we need to pay attention to that will help us indeed achieve economic consolidation and help us to fast track the progress from 2026 to 2029 and indeed 2030. The first one is the growth gap. We have moved significantly from where we used to be. Now we are in 3.8%, the real GDP, but the expected growth that the economy needs to really move ahead hangs around 5.5, 6%. We also think that in terms of the structural weaknesses, we record currently manufacturing contributing 1.5% for the year, and then agri 2.2. We need to move forward beyond this to have an economy that grows at on the average of 6%, and to have just the services sectors leading this growth by 60% shows that we need to do much more. We also are noticing the fiscal stress regarding our capacity to manage our external debt and our borrowing. And lastly, the risks of policy reversal. The political situation is coming. By 2027 will also be in a very different condition. So the question is, how do we continue with what we've started, and how do we keep focusing on the goal eventually? And so the next slide we want to share represents what we've observed as we call it a critical 18-month window after stabilization reforms. We've seen this being displayed in countries like Ghana, countries like Brazil. And what they did happened to be exactly what we went through and what we are going through now. After a series of reforms to stabilize the economy, most countries are so satisfied with this that they relax. And after 18 years of non-consistent implementation and consolidation, the economy reversed back. We've seen this in different countries. So we think the gains we've experienced now, we are seeing now, good, but we need to craft how do we move from here? And so by 2027, if we are distracted by the gains we've seen now, and we are not really doing really good in terms of deepening our reforms, our institutions, the fear is we might not be able to achieve or go beyond what we have classified as consolidation phase. Now, we developed 4 pillars as to the best approach, to look at the consolidation. The first one is macroeconomic anchoring. Different people have different views about macroeconomic stability. Yes, everybody says, yeah, we still need to deepen this, we still need to do that. Yes, but the most important thing that we've identified is that our inflation targeting, we should be looking at a single digit by 2019. The single digits in this case represent the best case to show that an economy has consolidated solidly, not just at the not just close to crisis period. We're also looking at the need for us to have way above 50 billion US dollar in terms of our foreign reserve and FX stability in the same ways. We are already experiencing positive real interest rates, which we think should be maintained. Another pillar speaks to the structural transformation, and this is huge. Most of the activities that we see about how we've achieved macroeconomic stability will be meaningful or otherwise if we have the sectoral levels displaying the same features. For instance, currently, our productive capacity is still a huge challenge, and which may reverse all the gains we have experienced so far. We have the manufacturing sector growing at 1.5%. Currently, we have the agri growing by 2%. This is a very risky signal in that we have huge sectors that are not able to fulfill the fundamentals of our consolidation goal in terms of job creation, in terms of impact and inclusion. And it will impact on how we also manage our inclusive infrastructure, inclusive growth, the job creation, and the rest. So we think we need to focus more in strengthening the structural transformation by identifying mostly the role of agriculture and manufacturing in the economy, and also the power and our export diversification. The third pillar speaks to institutional deepening. The new tax laws will be coming, or is already here with us. It's not coming, this is January. We need to make sure that we strengthen not just the collection, not just the getting in the appropriate money, but also in spending, because this will also impact on how we consolidate the present condition. And lastly is the social protection and jobs. This looks okay when it comes to helping people to be isolated from the negative impact of economic instability. But as we move on from here, we need to redefine what social protection and job means. It shouldn't be, again, the business as usual of protection. It should be protecting people to launch ahead, protecting people to be part of the productive atmosphere. And so these are the issues that we think we can concentrate on for now that will also be of great impact on our economic consolidation. Now, we've also identified how we can go about working together or playing out these 4 pillars. The first one is the collaboration or coordination between the monetary and fiscal policies or institutions. We've seen this played out last year greatly, and we've seen the result. We think we should continue on that path to make sure that we achieve a greater, management, especially on the side of the monetary part, where we now should begin to look at how do we focus on inflation targeting? How do we make sure that inflation is not just reacting to instability, but now driving the economy, the inflation targeting driving the economy. The same thing happens about the sectoral rebalancing. We've talked about the role of manufacturing. Manufacturing isn't just about producing finished goods. It's also very critical in expanding agricultural value chain. Agri cannot go anywhere when our industries are not doing fine. So it's a very strategic sector in the economy that we really need to look into. And the last one is institutional consolidation. Now, in the area of private sector imperatives, we can have reforms, we can have policies, but again, the signals and the readiness of private sector in driving this is very important. And that's why we've identified just 3. We are hammering again on manufacturing expansion and agri value chain, given the fact that these sectors are so critical, not just in the state of the Nigerian economy, but globally. Evidence suggests that countries that consolidate and grow indeed are playing along the capacity they have in manufacturing and agriculture. There is a need for strong policy that will revive these sectors. To have 2.2 or 2.5 contribution GDP growth of agriculture seems to be we are underplaying our strength and our capacity. So we think we need to look critically at that, and also the financial deepening in terms of the private sector credit expansion, fintech partnerships, risk sharing facilities, and so many other innovations, and the opportunities are there for us. For instance, if we manage the consolidation process very well, evidence suggests that we can grow the manufacturing sector by 6 to 8%, because if they are well linked with especially agriculture, we can achieve this. Now, we've identified that, of course, there are risks and there are mitigations and so many things that could happen in the process of consolidating the gains we've achieved now. So we've identified what the risks are and how to possibly address them. And the first one is the policy inconsistency. The chairman mentioned that as very, very important. We've also seen that from different experiences and case studies from peer countries, in that most of the time policies are implemented when the crisis is high, or when we achieve gain, most governments relax on the efficacy of that policy. So we think we need to look at the reform fatigue risks. The second is the sectoral constraints, the implementation, especially regarding security in the north and indeed in every part of the country, and the agricultural productivity gap, mentioned that. And the third one is external shocks. We've seen this year or last year and this year how the global dynamics could change a country suddenly. We're in a very dangerous situation. We're just coming out of our economic instability, operating gains. We need to start thinking what happens this year if the global economy becomes so unstable. For instance, the US and Venezuela, the oil price and oil production implications. How would that impact on our budget and our expectation as to growth? This is a risk that we think we shouldn't be focused too much into internal factors when we talk about economic stability. We should start to start looking at what happened outside so that we can appropriate the gain and get ready for any negative impact. And the last one is the capacity gaps. we want to also advise that we take the issue of tax very seriously in terms of the implementation and the capacity within the institution to carry out what is necessary. And lastly is our macro projection. This year, we've decided to make our projection to be based on what we refer to as consolidation. In other words, we are not making projection like we are just making it without understanding the situation we are going through. We've moved from 2024, 2025. We've achieved tremendous gains. Therefore, the capacity we should start developing now should be based on what we can do, not just what we need to do now. And so our projection align with what we have in our framework from 2026, 2027 to 2028, and then 2029. Let's concentrate on 2026. By emphasizing the role of agriculture and manufacturing, we think we can do 5.5%. Last year, we have projected 5% for our optimistic projection. We ended up with 3.8. But now this is not just optimistic. This is not an optimistic. This is driven by the urgency of consolidation. And so this year, we are projecting 5.5%, inflation around 16% for the whole year, and then our reserves to jump to 52 billion US dollars. And the same thing, if we can achieve our 2026 target, it's easy for us to lay other layers of 2027, 28, and 2029, and so forth. So these are the major evidence and data that we want to throw out for us to see how do we achieve this, what would this mean in terms of economic consolidation. But again, if we fail to do this, if we don't concentrate on the need for us to consolidate, the risk is still there. We may, move back and start going in a rate of 2 to 3%, which what we've been doing so far. I know we have so many projections for the year, positive, optimistic projection. And so we have assumed that this shouldn't be what we need to concentrate on. We shouldn't be here. We've been here before and we've moved past this. And lastly, these are the critical hacks from the government, the need to implement consolidation agenda with discipline and transparency. This is a very critical situation we find ourselves. We have moved, we have gains. That means that we need to be more serious and more, we need to take things so seriously, because very soon we're going to achieve the aim and the goal that we are setting for ourselves. And for private sector, the need to partner, not only to partner with government, but also to hold government accountable for reforms, which is one of the critical missions of NESG. Hold government accountable for reform, and indeed all the citizens. And lastly, from international partners, they need to continue technical and financial support, amplify credibility messaging internationally, and monitor and report on the consolidation progress. And lastly, Nigeria has turned the corner. Now we must sustain the momentum. The momentum is the consolidation. And we hope that when we come next year, what we will show is the evidence of consolidation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for an excellent presentation, Dr. Olusegun Omishakin. Now to the most important business of the day, which is the official launch of the Macroeconomic Outlook, the report. I'd like to invite to step forward Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ni Yusuf, accompanied by the CEO, Dr. Tayo Adiloju, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Mr. Wale Edun, the Honorable Minister of Industry in the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, Senator John Owa Eno, the Vice Chairman of the Summit of the NESG, Mr. Boye Olusanya, the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, Mr. Mohammed Sani Abdullahi. All please rise. Thank you. Representative from the IMF, please join us. And World Bank. IMF and World Bank. One on the other side. Nancy, please. Nancy, Nigeria's #1 business and economy broadcaster. Thank you very much. So we're going to pull this down at the spelling of NESG. Are we ready? Okay, one woman on this side, please. Thank you. Everybody say N. Everybody say E. Everybody say S. Everybody say G. Nothing must be pulled down. Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, please all file forward. We have a copy of the reports. You can please stand on the floor now. Chief Economist. Okay. Yes, please stand in front of the podium. Sorry. All right. Everybody say NESG. Everybody say macroeconomy. Everybody say 2026. Everybody say go and sit down.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Ministers. Thank you, Deputy Governor of Central Bank. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, NESG. Thank you, CEO. Thank you, and thank you. I'll allow us just 15 seconds for everybody to grab a copy and unveil it and open it or wrap it as we prepare for the keynote speech to be delivered by the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy. The theme, Nigeria's economic reform journey, consolidating economic stabilization gains. Ladies and gentlemen, this is another very important moment at today's occasion. It's now my pleasure to welcome the Honorable Minister for Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy. Please put your hands together for Mr. Wale Ade.
Thank you, and good morning. Very pleased to be here. And you know, Dr. Omishakin was allowed to get away with so little formality. But as a government official, I think I have to do a little bit of that, but I won't take too much time on it. But let me first of all remind us, if I may, that before I proceed, let's recognize the significance of today, January 15th. It is have our thoughts with the armed forces, of course, led by the Commander-in-Chief, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, GCFR. We pay tribute to them. We honor them. We honor our fallen heroes, and we salute those that continue to serve. May the souls of our fallen heroes rest in perfect peace. Amen. As you can imagine, with such quality from Mr. Ni Yusuf of NESG, as well as the chief economist, a lot of what needs to be said has really been said. But I will do my own part to give us a sense of maybe going a little bit deeper in some cases regarding the topic of the day, the economic reforms of Nigeria, the journey, the consolidating gains and sustaining momentum. Let me quickly move to a little bit of formality as well. Let me appreciate the chairman, NESG, Mr. Olani Yusuf, the vice chairman, and indeed all the leadership of NESG. And we really extend our appreciation to NESG. It has consistently provided technical support, rigorous policy engagement, and constructive advocacy in Nigeria's economic journey. And we saw the origins with the late, of blessed memory, Chief Aneshonekon. But you have NESG remained a critical partner to government through, of course, the annual summits, the policy dialogues, and of course, occasions such as this that help align public policy with the all-important private sector insight. The private sector is 90% of the GDP of Nigeria, and I think that says it all. So I'm honored at this invitation to deliver a few remarks at the launch of the 2026 Macroeconomic Outlook. It is timely, of course, the topic. It does resonate with the priorities of the new renewed hope agenda of the government. as articulated by the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, most recently in his 2026 budget speech. And as a coordinating minister of the economy, working with my colleagues across government, my job is to ensure that macroeconomic reform translates into tangible benefits and improvements in the lives of Nigerians, improved availability and affordability, of course, food, expanded access to housing, affordable mortgages. Mortgages now been issued at less than 10% interest, which is of note at this particular time of relatively high interest rates. Of course, as was alluded to, reliable electricity to power homes and industry, and modern road infrastructure that connects people, connects markets, connects regions, and of course, the efficient delivery of social protection, of direct benefits to, in particular, the most vulnerable. These priorities set by Mr. President himself do anchor our economic agenda. We've heard that 2026 is a pivotal year. Ladies and gentlemen, it does, I agree, mark a pivotal moment in our journey, because after 2 years or so of implementing what we all agree are transformative and politically difficult reforms, this administration has delivered what I would say significant macroeconomic stabilization. We saw the characterization just now that we're in stage of consolidation. The way we see it is that as the first stage was attacking and dealing with the major distortions that had held the economy back for so long, and we all know what those were. And that has followed, we feel, stabilization. When you look at the growth trajectory, when you look at the success in terms of the monetary aggregates, that we feel is a sense of stabilization. And we can talk about it, whether it's consolidation, whether it's but the key thing is that after these years of economic progress, let me say, we are now at the threshold of stabilization, consolidation, but it's a phase that demands resolve, discipline, and policy consistency as we go forward. And the central message is that Nigeria cannot afford to pause, cannot afford to retreat, cannot afford to slip. And that's a big undertaking. And success here will determine whether stability is converted into sustained growth, whether growth delivers productive jobs, and whether poverty is reduced at scale. If you look at the figures that we were given just now by the chief economist of NESG, he said reduction. He said 100 million and an arrow going down. I interpret it as lifting 100 million Nigerians out of poverty before the end of the decade. That's what the figure he gave us, and I think it's a worthy target. So we need to position Nigeria firmly as a competitive regional and global player, capable of feeding itself, housing itself, and of course, of powering the Nigerian economy. So what has happened so far? I think I don't need to dwell too long on the past, but we do have, as a result of the steps that have been taken, enhanced economic resilience, restored macro stability, and we have created a more transparent and competitive business environment and bolstered investor confidence. And if I was to put it in layman's terms, Mr. President has changed the country. The country used to be one where, as a young person, you look at what is in front of you and you are forced to say, there are many distortions. Let me go and attack, and let me go and see if I can benefit from one of them. Whether it's access to foreign exchange at below market rates, one way or the other, directly or indirectly, or access to subsidized petroleum products at one stage or the other of the value chain. That is no more. So the young people of Nigeria now have a much more level playing field. And I think the one thing that we also, in our conversation, need to focus on is the demographics and empowering young people, digitally in particular, to be an important aspect of the global value chain, of the exports that can now be done, export of services across the internet. But just let me say that, of course, we have our development partners here. Our efforts have not gone unnoticed, and we had a very good reception at the World Bank annual meetings last year. And on top of that, we have moved off the grey list. And just yesterday, we moved off the EU, what the EU called, I think they call it the high-risk third countries list. Which means that without that, the EU companies and institutions will be reticent to do business with Nigeria. We are off of that. And of course, we have had the benefit of improved ratings by the various rating agencies. So as we heard earlier, real GDP is up, but also 27 sectors have grown above 3%. So yes, manufacturing and agriculture are not where we want them to be, but 27 sectors have grown. People are finding areas in which to operate and to thrive. And the inflation story, we don't need to say anything more. The graph says it all. Very well done, the monetary authorities, my brother, Governor of Central Bank, and whole team. And the inflation fight, it's everybody's fight. So as interest rates go up, the manufacturers, the investors feel it, government feels it, because our debt service costs, of course, reflect that. But we all agree that the first fight is the fight against inflation, because that's where, in particular, the common man suffers the most. We know what's happened in terms of the trade surplus, the foreign exchange reserves, the market capitalization of the stock exchange. I think it's above $500 billion, which is a threshold with which they look at for the Morgan Stanley index and to take you seriously as a market. And why that is of particular importance is that when we talk about access to financing, we as Nigerians, we are required and we will have to fund our own businesses. We will have to have savings instruments that allow at all levels, at the retail level, people to access profitable investments, and it will be mainly through the stock market. How would someone invest in a Dangote refinery that's coming to the market, if not through the stock exchange and probably through a fund that gives them access at a very, very low level to that type of investment that will give unearned income, that will give dividends to them, and thereby provide access for financing across the board. Nigerian money will need to move into savings and investment at all levels for us to grow this economy. That's why that market capitalization is particularly important, and we need to see further growth in that area. And, you know, all these outcomes, they do reflect deliberate policy choices, and they do create the macro and fiscal conditions required to stabilize food prices, lower the cost of capital, expand mortgage lending, scale electricity delivery, and accelerate road construction, just to mention a few, across the Federation. And as we have said, our task is now to consolidate those gains so that stability becomes prosperity. And of course, prosperity becomes shared prosperity, where millions are lifted out of poverty. In terms of fiscal performance, we saw the risks were highlighted. We need to strengthen the foundations amidst challenges. Despite the global headwinds and domestic constraints, Nigeria's fiscal position did demonstrate resilience and, I would say, marked improvement, and reflecting an attempt at disciplined management and transparency-focused reforms. Of course, the fiscal deficit at 3.4% was relatively stable in 2025, just above the Fiscal Responsibility Act stipulation of 3% maximum. So there's a fight to get it down to within the level stipulated. And of course, we've said debt service was highlighted as something that we have to keep battling with. The debt to GDP ratio is more than acceptable. And when we look at the public stock of debt, it's 100, in Naira terms, it's 152 billion. Well, 30 trillion, sorry, 132 trillion, just over 152 trillion, just over $100 billion. But of that figure, 30 trillion, and I've just referred to transparency and accountability, 30 trillion was outside the books, was brought in. Those were the ways and means that were not they were just ignored before. And now we have put them inside as part and recognize that this is part of the debt stock of Nigeria. Another 50 trillion or so is accounted for by the fact that it's the dollar denominated debt. When the exchange rate moved, of course, that will move. So you've got 50 plus, so out of 152 trillion naira, 80 is just adjustments. It's not new borrowing at all. So I think that's an important metric to bear in mind, that this adjustment process has meant fiscal realities which we have to deal with. In terms of the budget of 2025, it's still being rounded up. We just as at the third quarter, we had revenue was still 61% below the budget, and likewise expenditure was 60% of the annual target. And while non-oil revenue performance did improve significantly at the federation level, overall revenue was constrained by shortfalls in oil and gas receipts compared to where we had budgeted them. Despite this, the president did prioritize fiscal federalism. There again, the transparency, the accountability to ensure that the federation account operated as it should. What belonged to the states and subnationals went to them. And as we have seen, it significantly strengthened the financial position of states. They run budget surpluses, about 3% budget surplus, and it allows them to be able to do so much in terms of social as well as economic spending, health, education, public services. In terms of the capital budget, we saw that the budget is at the end of the day, is a law of the National Assembly, and they extended the 2024 budget for the whole year to ensure that, I suppose, that projects were completed. And that meant that in aggregate, capital expenditure in 2024 reached 11.1 trillion, 2024, 2025. So that was 85% performance. 2025 capital below that, and that reflects that the government's emphasis was on completing the priority projects of 2024. And despite these fiscal challenges, it's important to note all the statutory obligations, foreign debt service, domestic debt service, salaries, pensions, they were all met by the government, an important promise of the president. And I think I will say that these outcomes, they underscore a commitment, really, a promise of transparency, structural reform, fiscal discipline, and trying to lay the foundation for rapid, sustained, and inclusive growth. And the 7% target that the government has set itself is because that would be about more than double population growth. And in order to lift people out of poverty in their millions, you need to be at least outstripping population growth by that amount. The outlook for 2026, the economy is projected, we do project it to grow at 4.68%, in line with the medium-term path to try and get to this all-important 7% per annum growth, as well as a US $1 trillion economy by the end of the decade. Inflation, which we have said we need to get into single figures, is expected to average 16.5%, and the exchange rate 1,400 naira per dollar. And we get this, I think, we're just to tell you where the figures come from. It's those in the medium-term expenditure framework, which has been approved by the National Assembly. So that's where they come from. The 2026 budget, aptly titled Budget of Consolidation, Renewed Resilience, and Shared Prosperity, reflects Mr. President's commitment to ensure that macroeconomic gains translate into real improvements in the lives of Nigerians. And we cannot overemphasize that it is not the metrics, it's not the percentages, it is the experience and the improvement in the lives of everyday Nigerians. And as I've said it before, in terms of electricity supply, food availability, and so forth. So the key aggregates of the 2026 budget: revenue, just about 34 trillion naira, expenditure, 58 trillion naira, and the deficit is about equivalent to 4% of GDP. And that just reflects the scale of our development needs at this stage, the ambition. And in giving those metrics and those figures, I will also emphasize that at the heart of what we are trying to achieve is that after removing distortions, after stabilizing, and as we say, consolidating the economy, it's a dash for growth. And that is based on investment. So the key is to put in place a framework that now encourages investment across the board. And I'll put it to you this way. There was a time, long time ago for me, a time anybody starting out would have to look and say that the best bet is to take their salary, change it into dollars, and it's a one-way street. For a long time, that was the refrain, that was the narrative. That's what Dr. Homishakin would have said to you, that, well, you can do a lot worse than this. That is now no longer the case. If you had changed your salary at 1,900, you will now have to buy back the naira at 1,400. Instead of 1,900, you have 1,400. So it's clear that the incentive is to now go out and find a productive niche in this market, no matter if you're starting out and you are good in technology. There's 90,000 kilometers of fiber optic network being put in place in line with in conjunction with the World Bank project and the Ministry of Communications, so that we empower that whole generation, which is half the population is under 19 years old. So those are the people to empower, and they are in the fastest growing area. So this is the way in which, when we say investment is the way to go, the environment for those investments is much, much better now than it was before under the distorted system we had. So the budget is anchored on 4 objectives: to consolidate, as we've said, to improve the business environment and investment climate. And I saw the SABRE, the World Bank project, in that improving the operating environment across all the 36 states. To strengthen human capital while protecting the vulnerable through social protection, and of course, to stimulate growth. One of the things that is critical is that on the fiscal side, we rely less on debt, which means boosting revenue, particularly government revenue. And in that, there's a major, major thrust. And I must say that I think we all recognize that when you do the kind of reforms which Mr. President is undertaking, there are winners and there are losers. The winners are the economy as a whole, but the losers are those that were benefiting from the old system. So it's one way or the other. It won't be a one-way street. There will be some element of, I would say, difficulty in pushing through these reforms. But we are digitalizing revenue collection for real-time monitoring, application of technology. Federal Treasury receipts are going to be issued to curb leakages. There's a central billing system that allows full reconciliation. And when you ask me, what does that mean? I'll say that when somebody is given a assessment of 100, if they pay 20, unless you have a central billing system that reconciles, it will just say that they are paid. And then unless you have one single receipt that shows how much they paid, you just know that they paid. But now we'll know that they paid 20, and everybody in the organization and themselves will be chased until they close that balance. That's the difference that this central billing system will make. And also, there are things like direct deductions that are being made to government revenue. Direct deductions before passing on those funds. These are the types of leakages and loopholes that will be blocked and stemmed. And of course, as you have said, the implementation of the new tax law is its aim is to be pro-poor, to broaden the tax base, simplify compliance, and of course, it exempts, and we must remember, it exempts essential items, food items, and small businesses. Let me, before concluding, let me just say that the strategic vision, it's important to say, Mr. President's priorities are the priorities that are being followed. And his vision is to chart a course for a resilient, diversified, globally competitive economy. With the exchange rate, the way it has moved and the stability that it has, it makes us competitive globally, regionally, and continentally. We have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. You have the ECOWAS, around 230 million, around I think, 400 million population as a whole. You have 1.3 billion population in the continental market. And we are now competitive to export across the borders, and we need to take advantage of that opportunity. So the priorities in 2026, to enhance competitiveness through sound governance, achieve agricultural productivity and food security. And there's a a point now to help the farmers, because prices have come below, in some cases, their costs, and that is being addressed very, very urgently in order to ensure that we encourage continued investment in food production. And of course, accelerating infrastructure development and energy security and investment in human capital. Public resources are constrained. Global capital development, concessional financing, but even financing multilaterally is retreating. The SDGs are not going to be met. You need $3-4 trillion a year. It's not going to come before 2030. We've seen how multilateralism is retreating. It means that we have to rely on our own domestic resource mobilization. That is a challenge that we have to accept. And the private sector is indispensable, particularly in the face of a move back from concessional financing and multilateralism. Our private sector, Nigerians in Nigeria, Nigerians abroad, Nigerians living in Nigeria with money abroad, they need to bring it and invest it. Nigerians abroad, they need to invest their money in their homeland. Nigerians in Nigeria need to save and take opportunity to invest. That is really at the core of our effort in a world where there's no real substantial help out there at affordable rates. And of course, government's role is to provide the basic macroeconomic stability. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, the task ahead is immense, but so is our resolve. We will, God willing, not retreat from economic transformation or lose focus or even have fatigue set in as we have been warned. And responsibility is very clear to translate that stability into inclusive, job-rich growth that delivers for the average Nigerian and all of us. And as I said, we need the private sector, institutions such as the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, and we'll ask you to continue to work with government the way you are, and that together we can consolidate the gains, we can sustain the momentum of reform and build a Nigeria that is resilient, that is competitive, and that gives us all a very, very good future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Thank you, and thank you again. That was very much a state of the economy address by the minister. Very well delivered. A dash for growth based on investments. The fitting next thing is to have a panel of experts to share their thoughts on how to proceed as a country in 2026 and even beyond. In no particular order of preference or seniority, I'd like to invite our panelists to take their seats. We have Nigeria's country representative for the IMF, Dr. Christian Ebeke. We have the senior economist for Nigeria for the World Bank Group, our partners, Dr. Samar Mata. Joining us online is the lead economist for Nigeria of the Africa Development Bank, Dr. Jacob Oduor. Please acknowledge him. And of course, the golden economy boy of the Central Bank, the Deputy Governor Economic Policy, Central Bank, Dr. Mohammed Sani Abdullahi. We also have the Chief Economist of Dangote Industries, Dr. Hassan Mahmood. And last but not the least is Dr. Yinka Babalola, who's Country Director, International Budget Partnership Nigeria. I was getting afraid that there was going to be no woman again. But ladies and gentlemen, blessed are the men amongst women. They're going to be flanked on either side by women. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator, Nigeria's #1 business and economy broadcaster, Nancy Ilo Naji. Nancy, your time starts now.
Thank you. Honorable Ministers, Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Captains of Industry are here, are present, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, and it's my pleasure to be able to moderate this session. Thank you, NESG, at least for putting this together. As Dr. Mishakin has said, at least in the Outlook, we've also heard from the minister what the federal government is doing, his aspirations and his ideas for this year. One thing I can take, and which is critical, is that Nigeria is at a crucial inflection point at this moment. After 2 years of reforms, the data now shows something important. And while I was seated there, something was ringing in my mind that stabilization is not the destination. How should it be translated from what we have right now, which is a fragile macro stability, into productivity, jobs, and most importantly, welfare outcomes, where millions of us are poor in the country? And this is what this exceptional panel, which is a constellation of voices, what a beautiful panel. Please give a round of applause to what NESG has done. What we're going to be doing in the next few minutes, critically looking at a simple but yet complex discussion. And after the panel, we'll open the conversation, of course, to questions, interventions from both our physical and online audience. So let me start. And I'll start with Dr. Becker. Doctor, the outlook is clear that Nigeria has exited this crisis mode stabilization, but remains in a zone of fragility. From your perspective, why is policy perseverance and not policy relaxation at this time crucial in strengthening gains?
Thank you, Nancy, and Happy New Year, everyone. And thanks to my family, NESG, for inviting the fund to share some views. I think your question is extremely important in the sense that there is no other way for Nigeria, given the type of reforms that the country has undertaken, right? So this is a country that has decided to allow the exchange rate to move flexibly. This is a country that has opened its financial accounts, so bringing in capital inflows, having foreign participation in both the equity market and the fixed income market. This is the country that has basically allowed prices to move flexibly so that they can be a signal for the economy. So bringing back distortions, bringing back heavy intervention by the government in controlling prices and controlling volumes is not something that is no longer sustainable for Nigeria. So the goal is really going forward to maintain, also to sustain the course, on both the fiscal policy and monetary policy. There are things that are still, I would say, unfinished business. Inflation remains at double digits, and I think the Deputy Governor will talk about it. The job is not done. There are two risks that Nigeria faces right now, in my view. One is clearly the risk of being very complacent and believing that the job is done. Not necessarily at the federal level. I see this risk more at the subnational level, where their fiscal space has increased substantially, and the risk of pro-cyclical fiscal policy in a pre-election year becomes a very acute risk that can actually undo the gains that Minister Edu and Governor Cardozo and other ministers have achieved. The second risk is what we call iatrogenic volatility. So it's self-inflicted policy mistake or pain that you basically bring into the system by doing some of the policy mistakes that you should not be doing. Going back the route of controlling the exchange rate will be a huge mistake right now because, again, you're going to deplete your reserves. you're going to distort market signal, you're going to really impact the market. So just to conclude, you have a country that faces policy trade-offs. Fiscal space at the federal level is limited. Monetary policy space remains limited because inflation is still high and there is a need to keep real interest rate positive. So how do you engineer higher growth when both policy levers are constrained? That's why I think NESG emphasized a lot the structural transformation and structural reform, because this is a third pillar. You need a capital market. Nigeria capital market capitalization is below 20%. In other countries, South Africa is 60%. Asset under management clearly can grow more. You have limits, in terms of infrastructure, what pension funds can do. So there is a lot that finance can actually do, not necessarily public finance, but private finance in unlocking some of these gains. So let me stop here, not to monopolize the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baker. Of course, this panel, like what Dr. Mishaki said at the beginning, is a panel of intellectual honesty. So we have to be as honest as possible because we have the policymakers in here to listen to what we have to say. And let me move over to Dr. Abdullahi, the CBN. The CBN has in the last 2 years been in the eye of the storm and all of that. But we've seen moderation in inflation. And just like Dr. Baker said, it's not El Dorado. The minister in his presentation did mention that we are looking at an inflation rate of 16% this year, which is also high, very high also. How the CBN balance sustaining the disinflation that we've seen in recent months through a mix of your tools, I must say, without avoiding excessive tightening? Of course, your MPR rate is still high, as it were, but we understand why it was done. We're also seeing that suppressing real sector recovery, as it were, and productivity enhancing measures. So what are you going to be doing about that this year?
Well, thank you very much, Nancy. Good morning, honorable ministers. Good morning to the NESG, and thank you really for the opportunity to be here and to share some of the views that we have from the Central Bank of Nigeria. I think we've taken a very good presentation at the beginning from the chief economist, but also very importantly from the coordinating minister of the economy, which has really clarified a lot of misconceptions around government policy. Central Bank has been working very closely with the Ministry of Finance in terms of that coordination, and you can see some of the results. But I think it's very important to backtrack a little bit and really remind people where we're coming from. And I think for the central bank especially, having joined in 2023, this was a really turbulent period in the history of our country. And I think the decision was made very, very early that the most important thing for the central bank to do and to be is to be a very boring central bank. Boring in the sense that we've had a recent past where the central bank has been very flamboyant and very involved in every aspect of our economy, from sports to aviation to power to agriculture, and in a way that has even been more involved than the ministries that have been charged with those responsibilities. And that became part of the problem. And that became part of the problem that the coordinating minister talked about 30 trillion of ways and means that were injected to the economy, which then fueled inflationary pressures. So the decision at the beginning was, let's be boring. Let's be boring in terms of focusing strictly on our mandate. What is the mandate? Price stability, exchange rate management, currency, advisory to government, those 4 or 5 things, and just try to do them really, really well. At the beginning, the conversation was, what is that anchor that even makes monetary policy effective? And when we took a few months to really evaluate, we discovered that the transmission of monetary policy had become almost ineffective over the last few years. Why? Because the central bank would enter a meeting, monetary policy committee meeting, take a restrictive stance, right? Raise interest rates, talk about controlling liquidity, and then go into the next room and then inject 1 trillion naira, 2 trillion naira through development finance. So it's more or less schizophrenic monetary policy, and so just collapsing that and stopping that and focusing really through 2024 was some of the decisions that you saw. 875 basis points increase in the monetary policy rate, really to rein in excessive liquidity in the system, ensuring that we went back to orthodoxy in terms of using the tools, the very limited tools that we have, and then working very, very closely, rather than at odds with the Ministry of Finance and the fiscal side, to ensure that those supply side constraints around inflation and FX are all reined in. I think part of the major issues that we faced also on the FX side was really that in 2023, we had come in really at a glut in foreign exchange supply. There was almost limited, there was almost zero foreign exchange coming into the economy. We had $7 billion of backlogs that were owed to various industries. And the decision to how to sort this out and really then open up the market for much more confidence for FX to flow, to be able to get the rates down, was very deliberate in terms of working together, for example, with the oil companies, changing a lot of rules that govern the foreign exchange market, to the point where today we sit with market players and they tell us that the market is as transparent as they've ever seen anywhere in the world. Everybody knows the pricing, knows what comes in, what goes out, and you can see that that has affected positively our balance of payments, our capital accounts, and where we're going in terms of the way forward. So I think that there's a lot that has happened in the last couple of weeks and months that have kept us really awake, but really focused on doing the job. Just to conclude on this particular point is that, I mean, the report that has been produced aligns very much with our own outlook, which we released at the end of December. A few differences, but you can see that we are all agreed that stabilization is very, very critical. And we can see that despite some of the fears at the beginning that the actions that would be taken by the central bank would significantly constrain growth, what we've seen actually is that many of the sectors that did not grow, even when they had single-digit interest rates, are now growing. And so you ask yourself a deeper question around credit, growth, and the transmission to the sectors. And I think that that's something that we can talk about a bit more. Thank you very much.
Okay, DG, let me just still stick with you on that point. So, Sas, just still hold your mic because you have a lot to address. We all agree that FX stability has improved. What you also said that even when there was single-digit interest rates, some sectors were not growing. The Naira, of course, has been stable. We've also seen the street rates narrow. Reserves have also increased. There's probability that it will increase more than that at this year. But my question at this point is that what specific market mechanisms and policy tools will anchor confidence? Because confidence is key in this year. 2026 is a pre-election year. This administration has less than 18 months to do whatever it wants to do again. Politicians will start opening their taps, which may not have control over, as it were. So what mechanisms is the central bank thinking of as a monetary authority to be able to stem that?
Thank you very much, Nancy. I think the Monetary Policy Committee in particular is very, very data-driven. And that's why even when in the market there were some calls, it is already, let's start celebrating. The Monetary Policy Committee has been very conservative because we have read a lot of the data regarding both global dynamics and also domestic dynamics. We understand the pressures that this year could bring, both from a global perspective and from a domestic perspective, and have been able to walk through various scenarios as to how to affect this thing. We think that the most important thing that we can continue to do is to continue to inspire confidence in the economy, to ensure that all our actions that are taken are transparent and are well communicated to the market, and that we work together with the various players that are responsible for the various parts of the economy to be able to, in a forward basis, really guide. And really the leadership of the Honorable Minister for Finance under the economic management team has been very responsible in also that sort of forward thinking and guidance, not only to the market domestically, but also internationally. So there's a lot of work really that has been going on the background, that we have been communicating at the points where we think the market needs to know. But we're taking our responsibilities very seriously in terms of regulating the financial industry, in terms of communicating with investors, and also the public sector at large.
Okay. Thank God we have a private sector person on the panel, so he would answer to that when it's time. Let me come over to Dr. Marta.
Recent private sector.
Yes, it's good you brought that in, but it's also good because he will have both experiences to talk about, so he served with you in your department, so it's a good one. All right, Dr. Marta, improving macro indicators, we've had that many times, million times. Even at your NDU in October, it was mentioned. Yet, household welfare tells a sobering story. How does Nigeria close this transmission gap between macro stabilization and real improvements in living standards and poverty reduction?
Yeah, thanks so much, Nancy, and thank you for NSG for hosting us. I will focus it on, I would say, 3 pillars. So one of them, which to some extent I think it's already been covered, I think the fight over inflation is not yet done, right? And I'm just quoting here our previous country director, Ndiame. When in his first meeting, when we had the first meeting with him, his kind of number that flashed to him was inflation. We were happy because inflation was going down. He was like, inflation is still 20%, and he was coming from the Philippines. And he was quoting that in the Philippines, back when I think inflation went to 6-7%, it was kind of a national emergency. So the whole country was mobilized to bring that down. And I was worried a little bit in the presentation when I see inflation in single digit to be in 2029. That's because if you think of it, what's the role of policymaking is to make people better, and one metric of it is inflation. And here we have 2 main metrics, growth and inflation. So if inflation stays above double digit for a long time, it will be hard to bring down inflation. So it's very good to celebrate getting inflation down, and I think it should be celebrated. And I think, all who contributed to that should be, given credit. But I don't think we should celebrate that this is over, right? So I think this is the first point, and this is where I would emphasize that I think monetary policy is maxed out. I think it should continue what it should be doing in terms of, making sure that inflation goes down. And I think fiscal policy has done a lot of work, but I guess in Nigeria also we always talk about monetary and fiscal policy. Well, there are other stuff that needs to be done. There is trade policy, there's structural policy that also need to come to the party to bring that inflation down. So I think this is the first one, is how to bring inflation down. And part of it is, I would say, related to competition, because a lot of markets in Nigeria are, you have a lot of prices that are higher because you have limited competition. So this is one angle which should also be thought about. I think the second part, which also I think my colleagues looked upon, is on spending. And this is where in Nigeria, when people talk about fiscal, most people only look at the federal government. We look at the whole country. And in 2025, actually starting 2024, subnationals have much higher revenues than the federal government, and most subnationals have a fiscal surplus. And if we look at their spending, most of that spending is going now into capex, which is opposite to the federal government. So the question is whether that spending is going into the right direction, and whether that spending is going into not only capital or infrastructure, which is good, but also into other sectors in order to improve the well-being at the subnational level, because at the end, subnationals are at the forefront of public service delivery when it comes to education and health. And I think the third important pillar is when it comes to social protection, right? And social protection, I think it shouldn't be only reduced to direct benefits. So direct benefits are important, and these needs to be continued and scaled up. But also there are other stuff like labor policies, like vocational training, like pensions. So this is where I think also there is need to, I guess, on social protection to have a more holistic approach beyond the direct benefits, which I think is going on, in terms to kind of look at the whole picture on how to provide this I would say, protection to the most vulnerable and poor, without saying that, okay, we don't want to also encourage domestic production and productivity. Thank you.
Because he said something, and I don't want it to slide because I assume all of us heard it. Dr. Samia said monetary policy is maxed out. Is that true? You don't have anything else to do, and we will be depending on trade, industry, finance. So answer in just one sentence for me, please. I'm coming to Dr. Mahmoud.
Well, I mean, I'm very happy, the World Bank, I think it's his way of saying, let's give a round of applause to the World Central Bank of Nigeria. Because when they say you're maxed out, he can't imagine what else we can do that is much better than what we have done. Thank you, Simon. But I think that there's still a lot of work. To be honest, we think that we've emerged from a very difficult period. We've now achieved some level of stability, fragile. There's a lot of risks, downside risks to that, both global and domestic, and we're looking at them very holistically. But if you look at the other side of the work that needs to be done regarding supporting the other parts of the economy to grow and ensuring that the benefits of stability actually reach households and firms, I think that work is still outstanding. We've got a very clear strategy from now to 2028 regarding what we want to do on credit policy, on development finance, working with the fiscal side. So there's a lot of work, really, but we will try to continue to harp on stability. Thank you.
All right. Dr. Jacob, I'll be coming to you in a moment. I haven't forgotten you. I know you are online. But Dr. Mahmoud, let's expand the inflation story to private sector. Of course, we know that high inflation continues to distort production cost and also compress consumer demand. What macro and micro policy mix, that is perhaps monetary, fiscal, supply side actions, are required right now without choking industrial expansion? If we take a look at the composition of our GDP, Dr. Omishaki did mention earlier on, there's still, space for so much growth with the high labor-intensive sectors, even though the service sector is driving that growth. But we know what our service sector is, perhaps made up of the small, perhaps selling recharge card, all those kind. They are not really highly intensive as agriculture, industry, and manufacturing. So what specific actions are required at this time from the industrial perspective?
Okay, thank you very much, and honorable ministers, everyone. Happy New Year. Thank you, Nancy. I think I will take it from two sides. The way I look at inflation now, the way I look at FX now, different from the way I was looking at it less than a year ago. So people should not query my economics when I change the narrations now. Now, the point is this. There are two sides of the equation. While we are looking at the GDP in terms of the volume, in terms of the growth, from the private sector side, we are looking at the inclusiveness of that GDP. So we are looking more at the aggregate demand side. We're producers of goods and all that, so we need to deplete our inventories, and that will come from if there are disposable incomes to buy the things that we have. So we're looking at inflation from the monetary side and the side. They're looking at inflation in terms of what impact it will have in terms of liquidity, FX flow, real effective interest rate. But we're looking at it at what proportion of the disposable income that will, mortgage, and that will mean the effective demand for our goods and services will be less. So it is important that inflation is low, stable, and predictable. That is important. But looking at it from inflation as against interest rate, yes, we have real positive interest rate, but that is more important or more incentivizing for foreign capital flow. On the domestic side, and the Minister of Finance mentioned it, the Minister of the Economy mentioned it, we are looking at how this real effective interest rate would enable domestic savings mobilization, because that is the most stable and sustainable capital buildup that we need in the domestic economy. This has been said, even though it's debatable, that FDIs do not develop an economy, do not industrialize an economy. You need domestic capital, national savings. And we have an enormous, what do you call it, idle funds within the domestic economy. So the idea that the country is poor and all that is still something that is not evidence-based. The point I'm trying to make here is that if we're retaining real effective interest rate, real positive interest rate, yes, capital will come in, yes, we'll bring in a lot of FDIs and FPIs, but your domestic economy is not attracted to do those investments because interest rates are high, inflation numbers are going down as we are seeing it now. But you also need to have that savings rates that will attract domestic savings to be able to enable you to build that. So the monetary authorities need to worry about that. That is not my concern for now. They will know how to deal with that, to balance that shift. On the liquidity side, on the FX side, yes, we must commend the entire administration in terms of the reforms and their resilience to stay on the track, because I think the minister mentioned it, the chief economist also mentioned it. It's a period of consolidation. Stability is there, but we shouldn't be carried away. I think Ebeke called it a name. I'm not in that sector now, so I don't memorize those kind of terminologies, IMF terminologies again. But we shouldn't be taking away that, oh yes, we're growing well, stabilization is coming and all that is there, so let us go to the market and play. FX stability is extremely important, and we have achieved that. From the private sector side, we are looking at how liquidity will be improved. Central bank has been very disciplined in terms of its intervention. Some people will see that, oh, central bank is coming to the market, that means the market is still not mature. No. Like the GG said, I'm the youngest private sector convert. So I know the binding constraints from the monetary side. For the central bank to stay afloat and say, no, we won't come into the market because we want price discovery, we want that, will not be a mature decision for now. But with time, it will come. So what the private sector will be more interested in, or what Dangote Group will be more interested in, is the liquidity of that market. The transparency is already there. The discipline and the symmetry of information is also very robust, so you can predict, you can play in the forwards market and futures market and be able to bet on on forward prices. So, and you can now, do your investment profiling. But what is important is that the liquidity, and where is the source of that liquidity? The liquidity should not be central bank intervention. The liquidity should come from sustainable channels. Export proceeds that are coming in, investments that are being done within the domestic economy, oil export, which is our main foreign exchange. So if we see those coming in, that will give us more confidence. It's not the external reserve, because like I said, looking at it from this side, we look at the external reserve balances, but also look at the encumbrances. Even though you cannot mark to market on the one, but it's important that you know what are the liabilities of government, because the central bank is banker to the government. So the external reserve is for the coordinating minister of the economy, for them to meet their liabilities. And so what is let out of that is what comes to the private sector. So we're looking at that structure of the external reserve and what is a sustainable level that can sustain the private sector. Let me stop there.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Mahmoud. Dr. Jacob, if you can hear me. Your question would now stem from the area of perhaps productivity in agriculture, manufacturing, the lags, the bottlenecks we're seeing right now. What do you think should be urgently addressed? What reforms are required to rebalance growth within those sectors? I would also ask this, because I'm looking at my time and we have to be very judicious with time, is around the area of power and logistics, cited as binding constraints as to our growth. What infrastructure reforms is most likely to crowd in private and development finance into large-scale bankable projects? The other aspect I'd like you to talk about very quickly also is after. Nigeria is Africa's largest market, but we are still not fully leveraging after at this point. So what trade standards, industrial policy reforms are required to make us more competitive as well as into regional value chains? So over to you, Doctor. And I'll give you like 3 minutes. God help you answer those 3 questions.
Yes, Nancy, thank you very much. And good afternoon, colleagues. And my apologies that I wasn't able to be with you physically. Now, 3 minutes will be too little, but let me try. So growth, as we see in the report, is driven by services. This is supposed to be a point of celebration if you look at our celebration as economies of structural transformation with factor inputs moving from agriculture to services. But I want to caution, and we need to interrogate what kind of services we are celebrating, because the report says we are transitioning towards transport, and I suspect it is mainly the keke drivers that are moving from agriculture into urban transport. So this is something we need to think about. So going forward, it would be important to improve the productivity of the service sector as much as we improve productivity of agriculture and manufacturing. But let me focus on agriculture now. So in many countries, and in Nigeria included, we tend to not to think about agriculture as a business. And this is the reason why we tend to neglect it, and particularly neglecting the smallholder agriculture farmers. So improving agricultural smallholder farmers have important implications, of course, for food inflation reduction and income generation for those people, and improving productivity in general for the country. And one of the issues that constrain agricultural productivity, and I'm talking as a former farmer, I left farming because of this specific reason, is the cost of inputs. So you have farmers going into farming, but they are not able to reap profits out of it. Basically, we don't think about agriculture as a business. So you go into farming, you produce, but you don't recoup your profit. So everybody goes to the market to look for tomatoes, but then nobody's producing it. How can we have input, fertilizer, seeds, production facilities that are giving us affordable inputs? That's one. Secondly, markets normally is a big thing, and aggregation at the smallholder farms has been found to be very important. And looking for external markets is another important thing. Farmers produce, including commercial farmers, but markets are really not existing. So you have these things of post-harvest losses and so on. And then lastly, on agriculture, private sector involvement is key. De-risking is important. We have the agricultural sector is almost the highest risk sector in the economy. So how do we de-risk to involve farmers and involve the private sector in production? In Nigeria specifically, the issues of insecurity that prevent farmers going to the farms are things that we all know. Manufacturing, on the other side, we have, again, the neglect of the smallholder, of the SMEs, which are the backbone of the manufacturing sector in many developing countries. But what we fail also to interrogate or ask ourselves is, what are we comparatively advantaged to do, even at the SME level, so that we don't go into manufacturing and start producing what we are not able to export anywhere. So, and where are the markets? So you go into manufacturing and you look for the markets, what are the standards in those markets, and focus on that. Infrastructure development has been mentioned a lot as a constraint to manufacturing development. I wouldn't dwell too much on it. Just coming into infrastructure, filling infrastructure gaps connected to that is the fact that we have talked about this so many times in all conferences, workshops, panels, infrastructure deficit filling is one of the key issues that we always mention. But what is the roadmap? And I call this reform measure the politically insensitive policy measures. So how do we, politically resilient development planning, how do we develop politically resilient development planning that gives us a roadmap on how to meet our infrastructure gaps? But on infrastructure, we have renewable energy, which is, we have solar, the sun in Nigeria and many other African countries, but we are not fully utilizing policy and regulation to onboard renewable energy is going to be important.
Doctor,
In many countries
Doctor,
now,
you're
we
not
also
meant to
have
come in.
innovative
Timing. Can you hear me,
financing
Doctor?
spearheaded by the likes of the African Development Bank. We have credit risk guarantees and blended finance, which many countries are using to improve their infrastructure development. So these are things that can increasingly be used in Nigeria to improve the infrastructure and specifically power.
Doctor,
Lastly,
Doctor,
on the trade policy that you mentioned, Nancy, you gave me 3 minutes.
Your 3 minutes over.
So,
Doctor,
oh, it's over.
Dr.
Okay,
Jacob,
so
yes,
lastly,
that's why I'm, trying to
So
interrupt
lastly,
you there. Doctor, just in one
okay.
sentence, can you just answer the question around after? I want to assume too that part of why we are constrained to fully leverage the market, the aftermarket, is actually what you have said. But can you just answer that after question in one sentence, Doctor, please?
Okay, so Nigeria must be prepared for AFS after. So if you look at just the visa issue, for instance, there are so many countries in Africa that have open visa policies already. But come to Nigeria, you have still these restrictions of visa entry policies for goods. Free movement of goods and services is still a problem. And these are issues that constrain trade policy. I will talk about issues to do with the regional infrastructure development, but these are issues that are regional. And then lastly, on local content promotion. So thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. Now, let me come over to Dr. Babalola. Very quickly, the Honorable Minister of Finance did outline what their aspirations are, at least for this year. But beyond revenue, consolidation also hinges on expenditure quality. How is this reform agenda? What ideas are you getting around what the government is doing to address the leakages of spending and perhaps sometimes efficient allocations? You see some ministries, some things are already put in there which they are not supposed to do. Street lights displays, street lights. So we're looking at inefficient allocations, as well as infrastructure, human capital, and social protection spending. I would also want you to quickly address the issue of public trust. Public trust is a fragile asset. What mechanisms, perhaps institutional mechanisms, are needed to ensure transparency, accountability, visible development outcome? And please, let's take note of the time because we have to go in the next few minutes. The next round, rapid fire sentences.
Okay, thank you so much, Nancy. I'm going to exercise privilege as being the only woman on the panel to speak for as long as I want. So, Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you to NESG for inviting me to be part of this panel to represent the perspectives of civil society. But before I answer your question, just to say that, you know, I've been working with government since 2009. My first job was to work as a technical assistant to the then DG of the Budget Office, Dr. Bright Okogu. And, you know, listening to the presentations today, what came to mind is that the more things change, the more they remain the same. There's so many things we keep hearing over and over again: stabilization, consolidation, jobless growth. We hear them all the time, and it feels almost as if we're running around in circles and never really making progress. It's that we create a crisis, and then we now have to find a way to come out of the crisis, only to return to the crisis, a few years into the future. So I think it's really important that government understand that, look, Nigerians are very simple people. It's very easy to please Nigerians. Just deliver results. Let people be able to go to primary healthcare centers and have those primary healthcare centers with facilities, with doctors, nurses, midwives on hand. Let children go to school and get a proper education. Let people be able to drive on roads, right, where they're not afraid that, they're going to get into an accident. Once you deliver these things and people can see them, you don't even have to do a lot of work convincing them, because if you look at it, for example, a lot of the social media discourse on the tax laws, you can see that issue of a lack of trust is very prominent. People are taking those laws, they're misinterpreting it. Why? One, the communication from government is not coming across as strongly as it should. It's not distilling those high-level details, because tax is extremely complex. It's very complex. I used to work as an SA fiscal policy. It was really hard. It's very technical. So how do you break it down into a way that the ordinary citizen can understand? Government needs to do more on that. And you're talking about being able to demonstrate results, right? Right now, if you go to the Budget Office website, the most recent report we have on budget implementation, I think it's for Q2 2025. The last Citizens Guide to the Budget was 2023. How do you expect the ordinary Nigerian to even be able to appreciate what it is that you are doing if you're not communicating to them, in language they can understand, in a way that they can understand that this is what government is actually delivering for the people? So government needs to do so much work on that. So I'm saying this, while recognizing all the efforts that have been made, because in 2023, we were at the brink. We were on the precipice. Everybody felt like, we're just we're heading off a cliff. And a lot of work has been done to pull us back. But to be honest, most of the credit belongs to the monetary side. My brother, Deputy Governor, take your flowers. And the thing about monetary policy tools, they're very blunt instruments. You cannot calibrate them very carefully, right? Usually you introduce high interest rates in an economy that is overheating, right? So that people are spending spending less, borrowing more, to bring things back to an equilibrium. Nobody can tell me that the Nigerian economy was performing above, where we felt it should have been. It's that inflation had gone so out of control, and the fiscal side was not responding the way it should. It had gone ahead to borrow from the central bank and had basically blown up inflation. And so, no, you're not going to stop me.
No,
and so,
just be fast about it. The has got to go. So
and so the central bank had to come in and use monetary policy tools to bring things back under control. But even as the central bank is doing that, we have a fiscal side that is also pumping more money into the economy. In the early 2000s, there was a hard-fought battle to bring us to counter-cyclicality in terms of fiscal policy. We're now moving back into cyclical fiscal policy, where as money comes in, we're just spending it. And then the quality of spending, because it's one thing to budget, it's one thing to allocate the funds and release them, it's another thing to get results on the other end, and we're not seeing the results correctly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Babalola. So let me just come, like I said, this is the closing, because we can't take everything. Okay, so please, with kind permission, can we give a round of applause to the Minister of Finance as he leaves? Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. So as we close, Dr. Rebecca, let's just paint a pessimistic picture and say that the growth momentum weakens, or the government pauses in what it's trying to do, perhaps from stabilization to consolidation. What do you think will be the risk that could emerge? I would also like you to bring in the area of global conditions that we're seeing now. If we can answer in 2 sentences so that we just go around quickly.
No, I think, as the country, starts a year and prepares a new budget, and the central bank has forecasts, etc., It's always important to think about contingency plans because again, you have downside risk, but you also have upside risk. For Nigeria, most of the risks are both external, oil prices, volatility, your geopolitical constraints and concerns, but domestically you also have self-inflicted risk, right? You know, if fiscal policy is too procyclical in the previous year, you're going to undo most of the gains. So in the case of a downside scenario, Nigeria has the tools to be able to respond. The central bank has some space on the reserve front. Fiscal policy also, the deficit is not too high, debt is not too high, so there is still room to think about countercyclical fiscal policy. But as our sister from the civil society said, a lot will be about the implementation. When you try to do countercyclical fiscal policy, are you going to ensure that the quality of these fiscal impulses is very strong? But I think it's very important to also have this conversation about downside risk and contingency plans.
Dr. Mata, demographic dividend was spoken about earlier, which still remains largely unrealized. So what human capital investments are critically needed at this time, urgent if stabilization is to translate into job-rich, inclusive growth?
Thank you so much. I think what's critical is to first allocate spending where it should be even within sectors, because if we look at the allocation of spending, for example, across states, most spending on education is going into higher education and healthcare, and to higher education, higher healthcare. It should go into primary education and primary healthcare. This is where we have the biggest deficits in Nigeria. And I think it's critical when you look at the numbers in Nigeria, you have very high mortality rate, very high out-of-school children. So I think the focus should be on getting these, how do you call them, 200 days or 2 years, if you want, of pupils getting it right. And this is why the critical mass should be focused on early childhood development when it comes to primary healthcare and to primary education, because if the foundation is not done right, that will have a lasting impact on a person.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Abdullahi, I can't allow you go without talking about banking recapitalization, which is just a few weeks away, the March deadline. How will the CBN ensure that stronger balance sheets translate into effective credit transmission into SMEs, into agri, into industry, and other priority sectors than what I will call balance sheet repair alone? So we want to see private sector, banks lending to private sector, ensuring broad-based.
Thank you very much, Nancy. I think that even at the inception of the recapitalization program, the major focus is how do we ensure that we have stronger banks that can support our drive towards a $1 trillion economy. And the only way to get there is through the credit to the real sector, to SMEs, to businesses that require funding at good rates. So as we close up towards March, I mean, the efforts have been quite impressive. We have about 20 banks that have already met it. A number of banks are meeting it every day. It's very busy within CBN today, tomorrow, and through to March, as you can imagine. A number of banks have already announced that they've met it once they've got their clarification. So we have significant amount of progress on that. However, the focus that we really are turning our attention to, especially from the financial system stability side, is that we ensure that the strengthened capital base translates into credit that is productive, that is well targeted, and that is sustainable. So it's not just about bigger balance sheets, it's also about how does this translate. And the entire work we've been doing institutionally over the last 1 year is to ensure that the central bank itself improve its regulatory capacity through using technology, deploying technology, to ensure that we can actually monitor that the effects of this capitalization translate into real sector growth, into real sector credit, to SMEs, to all of that then the central bank can monitor. And where they don't, then we will be able to act and step into that. So there's a lot of focus really on that.
Dr. Mahmood, private sector has a lot to do. How can large industrial players be deliberately leveraged, to deepen value chains and SME participation to ensure inclusive broad-based growth? Because even as we also point our fingers to the government, we should also point other fingers to the private sector, because you provide majority of the jobs. Very quickly.
I think from the Dangote side, how we can also bring in more private sector inclusiveness, looking at the lower segments of the private sector, the SMEs and the nanos that you mentioned, is backward integration. How does the investments that big conglomerates like Dangote does, get feeders from around the rest of the economy? Examples are like the refinery. Refinery is a very big project, $20 billion, but there are small plastic makers, those that are going into port transportation, those that are going into other feeders that goes into that place. Even within the refinery complex, you have constructions, buildings, households that are there. You have those that come to start vegetable farms and all that to feed those that are there. We have over 2,000 work. So you see that backward integration, but the private sector should facilitate that. You should not allow, or like the Dangote as a group should facilitate that, which we are doing enormously. Same thing with the cement side, how other feeders come into that space. What is important is that the regulatory authorities or the government, the public side of the equation, is able to provide that policy consistency, transparency, and efficiency to enable the private sector go into those kind of CSR investments, because largely they could not be necessarily profit orienting ab initio. So it is important that the fiscal side or the monetary side also provide that conducive environment to enable that facilitation of backward integration crystallizes.
All right, Dr. Babalola, you talked about tax reforms earlier, even the budget. I would like you to anchor on perhaps how those recent reforms translate into more stable public finances. Clearer rules for businesses and stronger confidence among investors within the medium to long term. Very quickly.
Yeah, so first of all, just to acknowledge that these tax reforms are like a one-in-a-generation type reform. We've never done anything this extensive, so kudos to government for getting it through. But at the same time, I feel that in fact, beyond investors, because honestly, I think investors will be fine. I'm more concerned about the marginalized. I'm more concerned about low-income earners. So the tax reforms have gone a long way to raise thresholds, for example, regarding who is taxed, introducing exemptions, zero rating, for example, VAT, things that will actually leave more money in the pockets of Nigerians. But I feel that there's still so much to be done. We talk a lot about multiple taxation. A lot of that happens at the subnational level. I know there's ongoing work, for example, to work with the Joint Tax Board, I think the name has now changed, to try and rationalize those taxes. We really need to make that happen. And it has to go beyond making policy pronouncements. We are all Nigerians. We hear about different policy pronouncements, but then when it comes to the actual implementation of those policies, it doesn't happen. And there's nobody actually monitoring and making sure that, we are making calibration and adjustments to make that happen. So I think that issue of multiple taxation really needs to be addressed frontally, because, the assumption is that people in the informal sector, especially poor people, that they don't pay taxes. Very untrue. As a proportion of their income, they pay a lot in taxes, in levies, in fees, right? Okay. And so we have to tackle that issue of multiple taxation, and also find ways to tax the rich. Property taxes, we need to do something about that as well. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, well, that property and luxury taxes too. So, Dr. Jacob, this question is to you. I hope Dr. Jacob is still there. What priority sectors will offer the African Development Bank transformational returns, perhaps for your support within the 2026 to 2028 consolidation window? Dr. Jacob, can you hear me? Please also answer very quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. So for the priority sectors, we still think energy or power sector is critical. This should be given the utmost priority. And then the minister mentioned about ICT, which is important in creating value for the service sector, which I mentioned is important for structural transformation. And lastly, transport, water, and sanitation. Most of the times we try to neglect sanitation, and it's a big problem, and water supply, not just for domestic use, but also for industrial use. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Jacob. So at this point, I invite questions and reflections from our audience, both physical and virtual, as we deepen definitely this critical conversation. So for those of us in the room, you want to ask a question, please raise your hands. Can I have an NUSG official help me with that? So we have one hand here. Okay, two. Any other hand from this point? Okay, so we'll take only the two questions here. Okay, three. We'll take the three questions here in the room, then the virtual questions. Okay, number one. Number one over there, yes. Introduce yourself and very quickly straight to the question and who the question is directed at.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Ascanio Russo. I am the managing director of PTML. PTML is the largest Ro-Ro multipurpose terminal in West Africa, owned by the Grimaldi Group, and we're based in Tinkan Island, Apapa. I have a question for the Deputy Governor of Central Bank. Of course, he's under the spotlight. And I also want to acknowledge the big improvement in the Forex as a private operator. The good thing is that I don't need to know anyone in the central bank to get dollars for eligible transaction. And this is not obvious. So thank you for that.
Okay.
At the same time, we all recognize that the role of central bank mainly is the control of price. I think the primary mandate of CBN is control of inflation. We've been talking a lot about monetary policy. I've heard the representative of World Bank saying that monetary policy has already exhausted this role, and I do agree. A lot has been done, and not much more can be done. I want to ask him if he thinks something can be done in the trade policy to have an impact on inflation. Of course, I'm a port operator. I'm very sensitive to trade, and usually we never speak about trade. But
Okay.
trade is having a big role on inflation. So I just want to raise this issue with
Okay.
attention. Thank you.
I don't know if it's the DG that will answer that question.
I have an answer actually.
Okay.
I have an answer.
Okay. Because we have the Honorable Minister for Industry here, you know, but anyway.
Do you want me? Okay. Well, thank you very much. I mean, the economy is all interconnected, and to be honest, from monetary to fiscal to trade is something that we have to discuss and deal with. And I'm quite happy that the Honorable Minister for Trade is here, and we're launching the trade policy right on the back of this. The industrial policy. I mean, we work closely with the Ministry of Trade. And as the minister said in his presentation, the Minister of Finance, he mentioned that we are in a position right now in Nigeria where the movement of the currency has given us the biggest competitive advantage in a long time regarding the ability of Nigeria to then be able to trade with the rest of the world at a price that is competitive at price. So we do believe very strongly that, in fact, for us to be able to get the benefits, the growth benefits of the reforms that have happened, a lot needs to happen in that trade space. A significant amount of work needs to happen in that trade space. So I'm quite happy that you're interested and keyed into it. I don't want to say too much because I know that the Minister of Trade, Minister of Industry might already have a significant amount of plans. We know that we've done some work with them at the back end, and I know that there have been announcements even last week that have come out from that ministry. So I would say watch this space, and I would say maybe to NESG, if you can help to continue to convene. I mean, on this particular topic, I think would be very critical for us to sit down and discuss and align, especially listening to the industry players, because we like to listen a lot and then go back and then craft something that responds to long-standing bottlenecks and then addressing them.
Thank you very much, DG, for bringing that important point, and I'm sure that Chair has taken note of that. So it's not just about perhaps economic policy stuff. It's about even those policies affect and getting every one of us to hear about it. The second question.
Sorry, Nancy, let me just say one thing before you. I mean, one thing I found interesting when I saw the advanced copy of Outlook from NESG was this statement that said FDI has been weak and declining. Largely correct, okay? However, also potentially incorrect. What we've realized, and we're trying to do some work now with NBS, is that over the years there's been a misclassification on the methodology of how we capture FDI. So FDI classification and calculation in Nigeria is currently based on 171 listed firms on the stock exchange, right? So, for example, companies like the ones that my brother Dr. Mahmoud is from, you know, investments to it now before it's listed would not be captured as FDI. So there's a number of issues around that. If you look at the SME space, like there's a huge amount of SMEs that have significant amount of investment but are not listed. And so that calculation is significantly missed out. So it's a lot of work that we need to do in the methodology, in the data, in the measurement. And besides this, a lot of things around the economic atmosphere as well, which we need to do some work on at the back end. And so for us, really, when we say we want to be a boring central bank, this is the stuff that we want to be able to put together, work with players, and then just be able to allow us to capture these things much better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, DG. Second question, please.
Thank you.
Name briefly to your question, and we'll
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Iyabo Olanrele. I'm representing the Director General, Nigerian Institute of Social and Economic Research. A number of recommendations have emerged from the panel discussion about consolidating the gains of recent reforms. My question is not particularly direct to any of the panelists, but I would have loved the Minister of Finance to respond. Perhaps maybe NESG can actually take it up as a reflection point for further research. I think there is some kind of a missing link in vertical coordination in policy making in Nigeria, specifically across the tiers of government. We've seen it being strengthened at the horizontal level, especially that the Federal Ministry of Finance and the fiscal side and the monetary side seems to be more coordinated now. But across the tiers of government, that link seems to be missing. So it is important that we have that coordination in order to enhance national prosperity, especially now that state governments are having enough and even surpluses to provide capital projects and the rest. So there is need for that link in order to enhance national prosperity and inclusive development. So maybe NESG can look into this in their further research.
Thank you very much. So that's more like a comment. The next question here, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Benedict Tegwe. I'm the Regional Coordinator of Nigerian Export Promotion Council for the Southwest. I really enjoyed this panel discussion, and it's very imperative that it is clearly outlined the need for the contribution from agriculture and manufacturing to be a lifeline for supporting consolidation of the economy. We are facing the export sector, non-oil export sector, and a lot of the SMEs, you know, have concerns about access to finance, and you know, like development finance seems to have dried up. You said that the CBN is not a little bit boring. We are hoping that we will see a lot of new windows for access to finance for the SMEs who are in the export space to continue to grow the sector and contribute. So we want to know how would fiscal policy have a role to play around that. Another question that comes to me very quickly is nobody is speaking about the evolution of technology. You know, everybody talking about AI, it's in the news all over the world. We don't know what are the risks, upside or downside risk. How are we, what's the outlook about how that technological paradigm will have its impact on the economy? And lastly, the World Bank Saber project. It was quite interesting to see it on the Outlook document by the chief economist who made a presentation earlier. And this is a project I've been following very closely right from the time I was in Ondo State as a state coordinator. And I felt it was very interesting, had a lot of prospects. At a time like this where the state governments are seeing fiscal surpluses and the World Bank Saber project seems to have increased in popularity and uptake across most of the states, the disbursement linked indicator to have a state policy on export, state export strategy, we find that very encouraging, but would have loved to see, you know, how has the World Bank Saber project been able to leverage and influence and impact state policy to drive fiscal support for non-oil exports at the state level. So if there's a dashboard or some analytics to see how we can push forward with that,
Thank you
especially
very
in
much.
our role. Thank you very much.
Dr. Samia, you want to respond to that very quickly?
Yeah, I'm happy to take it offline to connect you with the.
Yeah.
No, I mean, because I'm not covering the project, so I don't want to talk on something that I know. So I'm happy to link you with the TTL of that project to kind of just guide you where things are. Thanks.
Okay, I also would like to say you're from NEPC. NEPC is one agency under the Ministry of Trade. So there was a question here around trade and industry that was asked by the DG. So it will also be nice to interact with the audience to be able to tell us what the NEPC is doing in terms of export and in terms of trade. I needed to bring that up. All right, we have other questions online, and I will start by. Okay, yes.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I think for bringing that up. So one of the major issues, I mean, that we've done a lot of work on is on that particular space. And in 2023, the central bank had spent about 10.4 trillion on development finance in various sectors, right? A lot of it, when we sat down and have done extensive studies in terms of impact on growth and development, it's not been convincing. So we've had to rethink how to deliver development finance or finance at concessionary rates to the sectors that matter. And we've realized that really what that work was mostly fiscal, but the CBN was doing it as a quasi-fiscal program. And so what we've done is to really have deep conversations with the Ministry of Finance to see how that can be properly placed. And I think that the Ministry of Finance have now taken it up. The Central Bank and the Ministry of Finance have been working on a disinflation and growth strategy that sees that. Now, we've done a lot of work in that space to understand, okay, look, what are the needs in the development finance space? Nigeria needs about 230 trillion naira in terms of development finance for various sectors. The capitalization and asset base for all our development finance institutions combined is not up to 9 trillion. So there's a huge gap in terms of that. So how do we crowd in private sector capital, both globally and domestically? How do we ensure that when that capital comes in that is used efficiently, that people don't deploy it to other uses? So we've done a lot of work on it, and the fiscal will be leading on this going forward. And then to see that as much as possible, we're able to crowd in finance from global partners, global investors, but also domestically to rechannel it. And then there's a clear program to then see how do we correct the incentives in each of the DFIs to ensure that when people give out money, it's not seen as government money that should just be wasted. So there's a lot of work in the background for that. And we're hoping that over the next few months this year, you will see some movement in that space.
All right. Let's take this question online. Dr. Becker, perhaps you would answer this. He's asking agility in governance. How can we apply agility in governance and yet get powerful outcomes that will deliver measurable impacts to the citizens? And I would also like you to speak on this question also around manufacturing and agriculture, what to do to stimulate growth and development. But I think we also looked at this when we're talking earlier on. So you could talk about agility in governance.
I think, yes, I would be very quick. I think, being agile when you formulate, macro policy is just to still, to be data dependent. I think the Deputy Governor mentioned it. This is how the MPC view things. So it means your ability to really see things in real time, but also to gather a lot of data, a lot of high quality data for you to be able to have a better assessment. Nigeria is showing, a lot of work in that space. They have revised the GDP methodology, but also the outcome of it. So now they have a better sense of how the economy is moving, what are the new sectors, what is the type of structural transformation that is taking place in the economy. Same thing with CPI inflation. I think this afternoon we will have the SG of NBS discussing again, the type of challenges that changing methodologies and things like that bring. But they all point to the fact that without high quality data, you can't have agile macroeconomic policies. So Nigeria is really improving the data, and this is something that the IMF and the World Bank are also supporting. On the agri part, just one sentence. We conducted the work this year that we actually published. Nigeria spends very little in terms of agri R&D, so the public spending on research and development on the agri space. There is a NEPAD threshold of 1% of your agricultural GDP that you should spend on research and development for agriculture. Nigeria is very low compared to peers. Without research and development in that space, there is very, very little you can do in terms of growth, including because of climate change and the importance of having, high-performing seeds, having agribusiness, agri-tech, etc. So very important to devote part of the budget also in R&D in the sector.
Okay, we have less than 5 minutes to end this session because I'm really very time conscious. But
Okay,
Dr.
yes, just to add to what IMF rep said, in terms of agility, and you also mentioned the question around the manufacturing sector. I think what is critical is institutionalizing governance, building strong institutions not tied to individuals. We are not seeing efficiency in central banks because Cardoso is there. No, the institution should be so strong that irrespective of the individual that comes there, you have to comply with the system that have been, crystallized in that space. So it is very important that we have that. We don't see revenue efficiencies as because Wale Edu is there. No, because Minister of Finance has structures that are already established. So institutionalizing that good governance is very important and is more sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mamu, for bringing that up. Not just about building strong men, but strong institutions. All right, Dr. Abdullahi, this question is to you. He's Gideon from FITC and is asking, many SMEs struggle more with regulation than financing, aside from just the revised cash-related policy. Is the CBN considering to reduce compliance burdens on SMEs while maintaining financial and economic stability? This is from Gideon, FITC.
Well, I think that there's a lot of work being led, including by the ease of doing business team from both within central bank and federal government led. So as much as possible, we've just finalized the final draft of the FX manual that hasn't been changed for a long time. And we've approached it with an ease of doing business lens to ensure that we're making it as easy as possible for businesses to comply and to be able to consolidate a lot of the checks that are required. So we will continue to work on that, including with other partners, to make sure that it's as easy as possible.
All right. Thank you. This is coming from Krista Emmanuel. He's saying, well done to the NESG for this timely forum. However, the takeaway for all stakeholders is how to translate these ambitious goals and reforms into sustainable productivity, jobs, and social protection. I think that should be really the takeaway of what we're doing here today. So I think it's just about 5 minutes to 1:30 because I'm watching my time very closely and trying to follow that up. But as we round up, today's discussion reinforces definitely a central message in the 2026 Outlook that was launched earlier, that Nigeria's challenge is, of course, perhaps no longer diagnosis, is about disciplined execution and not even relaxation at this point. Consolidation demands credibility, it demands coordination, and the political economic courage to stay the course at this time. The real test of reform is not macro indicators alone, but whether stability becomes institutionalized and prosperity becomes broadly shared. Thank you very much. Please, a warm round of applause to all our panelists. Fantastic.
Please stand for a group photograph. Mr. Chairman, please join them. CEO, please join them. Dr. Hassan and Dr. All right. The next item on the program is the outlook on industrial development in Nigeria based on the new National Industrial Policy. It's a soft launch of the National Industrial Policy. And the man that showed us that responsibility is here. He's been here with us all morning. Thank you. So we'll be taking a short policy address from a former senator and now member of the Federal Executive Council. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator John Owan Eno.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. Let me be as short as possible. with protocol. I mean, it's the chairman of the NESG and other board members. Let me say right away that when I looked at the program and I found out when I was going to be required to deliver this address, I'd first considered I was going to come in here in the PMs, but I'm glad I came in here as early as, before 11, and I've sat through. And I think that, the sessions have been quite educative. I mean, I'd like to commend the NESG. I mean, it's for the kind of confidence that you've been able to, to achieve for yourself. I mean, it's you become such a respected body. And earlier on, I was sitting by the chairman. It's actually my first time here. And I told the chairman that there must be something about a room as small as this. And he said it was even smaller. And he said those pillars represent the extension, to what this room is. So really not about the size of the room. It's about the size of the ideas or what is produced in the room. So let me thank NESG for this invitation. And why not? Talking about the 2026 outlook, macroeconomic outlook, coming at a time that for the first time in several years, I think the country has an industrial policy. I mean, it's the coordinating minister of the economy is not here anymore. But very early, at the beginning of this administration, I was the Minister of Sports Development. And when, at the beginning of these sessions, the moderator talked about yesterday night and all of that, I'd said, if I was still that minister, I'm sure the whole country would have come on me by now. So very early, the first few months when I got moved to industry, it took the Minister of Finance to just make a remark to me in a conversation. And he said, bodies like UNDP won't even listen to you without having an industrial policy. I mean, that sparked it. And then again, perhaps it shows how little you also know about things until you get involved in them. That was how we found, my team and I, that for several years, the country had no industrial policy. We got to work. And I'm glad that before the end of last year, the Federal Executive Council approved an industrial policy that had been validated several months back. I'm talking about industrial policy, and when Nancy and her team were on, there was the issue about the trade policy, again. And I think that on and on, since the last 1 year, discussions about industry and industrialization have actually become more and more in terms of the public discourses. And I think I'd like to give commendation to the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, GCMR. It just took one decision when in October 2024, he decided to rejig his cabinet, and to the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, he sent two ministers, Minister Oduole, the Minister of Trade and Investment, with a mandate for trade and investment, and myself with a mandate for industry as the Minister of State for Industry. I mean, and again, because of long-held opinions, and it's difficult for the Nigerian public to understand. And that's why a trade policy matter is referred to the Minister of State for Industry. Having said so, it is still one ministry, and I think that whereas we've not had an industrial policy, we've always had a trade policy. We've always had an investment policy. So I'd like to, somebody asked questions about that. It would be good to look at that trade policy as well. It may have answers, to some of the concerns. So I think that I'm honored to join you today on this. Again, looking at the program, to talk about a soft launch. At some point next month, what we plan to do is to have a formal launch of the Nigerian industrial policy. Yesterday, I signed a communication to the president inviting him to personally be available for that formal launch. I mean, it's increasingly, we have various policies that are produced by various MDAs and all of that. But I think that a country's industrial policy is like none other. A country's industrial policy. Mr. President's 8-point agenda was clear on Agenda 7 to accelerate diversification through industrialization, through digitization, creative arts, manufacturing, and innovation. And so this engagement for me is particularly significant. So I think that the ministry, my office, we're happy to work with NESG to give that formal launch, the character that it should have. We think that we didn't just produce a policy to live in our offices, but a policy that every Nigerian has a buy-in. In terms of preparing it, at every stage, we had collaborations with different stakeholders. We didn't just produce a policy as well to just keep, but a policy to implement. As I speak, I have a small committee that is working on implementation. We want to be big on implementing this policy, not just on the policy itself. Because, the passing notes from Nancy, from the last commentary, spoke to that. How do you translate what you have to something that impacts to jobs, to productivity, to employment, to all of that. So I think that, so it is in that spirit, that I'm pleased to deliver, a policy address, that speaks to that. And I think that, like everybody has mentioned, I think that our country actually stands on really that inflection point. And for decades, for example, the Minister of Finance characterized a lot of that, namely our high import dependency, weak manufacturing, debt. Incidentally, the second quarter GDP of last year, 2025, when our GDP grew more than 4%, the drivers of that growth were listed to be the oil sector and industry. It's not oftentimes that you find that occurring. There's still a lot to be done. Fragmented value chains, remain our challenge. An industrial sector that is unable to absorb our growing numbers, labor force at scale. We also stand at a point of immense opportunity. And I think as Nigerians, we all do realize so. We all do acknowledge so. The large size of our market, even though the benefits wouldn't just come because of that large size, we've signed into the AFCFTA. What are our aspirations? What do we hope to achieve? Are we going to allow ourselves to become a dumping ground for other countries? When, for example, I made one of the first trips that I made outside as Minister of State for Industry, and I had a sideline meeting with the Secretary General of AFCFTA, talking about the automotive industry. He said the rest of Africa was waiting for Nigeria because South Africa and Morocco had a saturated market. So how ready are we signing to the FCFTA? So for me, the NIP 2025 was conceived to resolve, what I call the paradox of our circumstances. Not with rhetoric, but with structure, with discipline, and with execution. So the policy for me answers a fundamental national question. How does Nigeria move from potential to productivity? How does it deliberately and measurably and sustainably achieve this? And there are policies and there are policies. What makes the NIP policy different? And I'd like to start by being clear that it's not an aspirational document. It's an implementation first industrial contract between government, between business, and between the citizens. So the key differences for me are: one, execution-led design; clear sequencing of reforms, assigned institutional ownership, performance benchmarks, and timelines. And we're going to be serious at this. Whole of government alignment, trade, investment, finance, energy skills, infrastructure, and regulation are deliberately synchronized. So no more policy silos. I mean, for the first time, I think that our industrial, trajectory, is going to be, governed by, a framework, no longer operating in fragments. 3, private sector anchored. The policy was shaped with industry and not for industry. And I think that from day one, our collaborations with industry, with MAN and different other groups was strong, was robust. Real constraints, not rhetorical assumptions. And I think for accountability built in, transparent monitoring, measurable industrial outcomes, public reporting mechanisms. All these are part of what we have in our policy. So it has strategic pillars. The policy is structured around 6 mutually reinforcing pillars. 1, competitive industrial production. I mean, how competitive can we get? Reduction of input cost, energy, logistics, finance. Very early, as Minister of State Finance, Industry, what we did was to put together an industrial revolution work group, and which identified about 5 major constraints, which we characterize as thematic groups or thematic themes. And then we have brought in various technical sessions. We've arrived at various recommendations and conclusions. Starting from last year, December, what I did was to, convene an, ministerial roundtable that focus on energy. What we hope to achieve is that we're going to have roundtables on each of these, thematic areas, and hope that we can have people in a room that can immediately, deal and provide solutions on each of these as the issues are thrown up. I followed that roundtable by visiting the Do Industrial Cluster, because we identified it as some kind of template. If we're able to solve and resolve the energy challenges of a Do Industrial Cluster, can we use that as a template to get across the country? 2, the second pillar, value chain deepening and import substitution. And under here, you have agro processing, you have solid minerals, you have petrochemicals, you have automotive, pharmaceuticals, light manufacturing. You have mandatory local value addition thresholds are part of what we're doing. Backward integration with enforceable milestones. So try as you try. It's when I talk about execution, we talk about all of that. The policy as it is would not achieve what the goals and the intentions are. What we think, for example, is that by 2030, can we get manufacturing and industrial contribution to our GDP to be about 20-25%? That's what we aspire. That's what our aspirations are. But to achieve this, it's almost like talking about Mr. President's $1 trillion dollar economy. All of these are big things, but I think that with commitment, with will, and with leadership, it's possible to achieve all of these. I think that we need to get to a point in which we're a bit more serious, with our industrial, aspirations. I'll give you an example. At some point last year, just the sheer 6 months temporary ban on share not caused an uproar. Why should it cause an uproar? In 2025, share not, Nigeria is reputed to be the greatest or the highest producer. So we can't have in-country capacity that can process these. When lesser countries around us have long banned the export of share nuts. The Raw Materials Research and Development Council has a bill in the National Assembly that speaks to 30% value addition for every product, every raw material before it's exported. That bill is taking forever to pass the National Assembly because of vested interest, because of corporations and bodies who operate in our country and are more interested in exporting our raw materials. So they get processed and they bring back to our country. I mean earlier on, the panelists, with the representative from civil society, said something. Said she had worked with the DG Budget Bright, Dr. Bright, and that we're just walking around. But the things we're talking about today have been talked before. I mean, is that how we're going to continue? I think that the answer is no. And I think that, so the third pillar is MSME to industry transition. I mean, we talk about the fact that we have the MSMEs are about 40-something million. And the number of businesses that are MSMEs are more than 90-something percent and all of that. What have we done with them? One of the first engagements that our interrogations that I had was trying to find out, can we have a list of these numbers? We don't have. And there are interventions on a regular basis by government. How do we monitor and measure the impact of those interventions if we don't even know what these are? So those are part of the things that we have in our, MSMEs as, feeders into industrial value chains, supplier development programs, access to, patient long-term industrial, finance. The fourth pillar is technology, innovation, and skills, industry-aligned skills development. ITF has been promoting the super program, but I think we're at a point in which that has to be scaled. Not training for the sake of it, but training for industry, right? It's when Dangote was building the refinery, how much of that labor that was required to build it was brought from abroad? Should that be the case in a country of about 230 million plus? So it remains a problem. So technology transfer partnerships, all that are part of. Pillar 5 is trade competitiveness and the FCFTA readiness. Export-ready industrial production are all standards, quality infrastructure, certification. All of that. And then the last pillar, institutional governance and policy coordination. The Nigeria First policy comes in handy and comes in strong. I remember at FEC, before the NIP was eventually approved by FEC, Mr. President, sitting in council, asked directly, does it have the Nigeria First policy? This is important. So at the heart of the Nigerian industrial policy is the Nigerian First policy, a clear, unapologetic commitment to prioritizing Nigerian production, Nigerian value chain, and Nigerian enterprise. I think that, it's, when we did some little bit of study on all of this, because as part of the mandate for industry is the promotion of made in Nigeria goods and services. How much more we can have, come into our coffers as a country by just implementing this. See how the huge size of our population. Imagine that we even had the capacity, right, locally to even clothe ourselves. Imagine that alone. It's not because we've not had that, that ability in the 70s we more than had. We've all lost that. So it's going to take leadership, it's going to take will and commitment. I did some multi-city tour of textile, establishments, at some point in 2025 that took me to Kaduna, to Lagos, and all of that. And we have quite a number of people that are interested. At the moment, we are working with some people who are growing cotton. And what we hope to achieve is that in the next few months, we'll be able to demonstrate how, from cotton planted in Nigeria, to taking that cotton, to a textile factory, how it eventually ends up with garment. We'll be able to demonstrate that and see whether that can become one little demonstration to show how possible things are. So I think that, all of these, stronger regulatory coherence, data-driven industrial, All of these are part. So the Nigerian first is the organizing principle that ensures our openness to capital does not come at the expense of domestic capability, and that growth is anchored in Nigerian hands. So for just implementing that and effecting it through the Nigerian industrial policy, it's going to provide so many jobs. When I've done some tour of some industries and companies, and pathetically, I find companies and industries that have not followed some others to close shop and relocate to other countries. They have goods that cannot be bought, that cannot be sold because of our appetite for foreign-made goods. Can we make some little bit of change even in terms of that attitude? And in saying this, we're not just talking about Nigerian first and saying people should reduce their quality expectations. We're also following it with the national, quality, emphasis. So what we're asking you to do is not just, as a patriotic duty alone, but even if it was, it's also economic. And I think that we want to match that with the quality of goods. And we're tasking the Standards Organization of Nigeria and other agencies that are responsible for all of this. So what this policy means, and this policy has different meanings for different segments of the Nigerian population. The Nigerian, industrial policy, has to Nigerian businesses, large, medium, and emerging. The NIP delivers clarity and predictability. Because it's a policy. It means stable industrial policy direction over a decade. It means reduced regulatory uncertainty. It means clear incentives tied to performance. It means a government that is a partner and that is not a bottleneck. The policy says to producers, if you invest, if you comply, if you add value and you create jobs, Nigeria will back you. That's what the policy says. What it means for investors, to domestic and international investors, the NIP sends a strong signal. Nigeria is open for industrial capital, but disciplined about the outcomes. You will find defined priority sectors in the policy. You'll find clear localization expectations. You'll find increased coordination across MDAs. You find long-term policy consistency. So Nigeria is positioning itself not just as a consumer market, but as a West Africa's industrial anchor. What does this policy mean for regional and international partners? This policy aligns Nigeria with best practice industrial development frameworks. It complements the FCFTA, global value chains, and sustainable development goals. It opens structured pathways for technical cooperation, for investment, and for co-production. So we are particularly proud of the deep technical collaboration that went in with UNIDO, whose global expertise helped benchmark this policy against leading industrial economies while retaining Nigeria's unique context. So what does it mean for everyone, Nigeria? It means more factories that work. It means more skilled jobs that are close to home. It means lower cost of locally made goods and a future where hard work translates into upward mobility. So this policy was built collectively. I'd therefore like to acknowledge at this session the invaluable contribution of first the ministry, MAN, the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, the organized private sector, the Nigeria National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies, line MDAs, regulators and implementing agencies, development partners and technical experts. This policy, to my mind, reflects national consensus, not bureaucratic authorship. So what is our implementation commitment? And I think that this is what matters the most. A few days ago, I had a body that came to see me in the office, And this body's main concern and interest is on implementation, is on execution. I mean, the fact that we haven't achieved most of our milestones is not because of lack of policy. Even though policy now guides and acts, it is our inability to implement. The fact, for example, that we've experienced gross failure, even in terms of our backward integration program in different areas, it's not because of that. So what do we want to do that is different? Is that on that same day that we're launching the NIP, we also want to unveil an implementation framework and strategy that can convince and get and win some confidence. I mean, there's public, the public is tired. It's tired of government. It is. I mean, that public tiredness is, affects me all the time. To the extent that whenever I have cause to even speak, I wonder, what do I want to talk about? Because it's not about the talk. It's about what do you want to do next? What are the next things that we want to do? I mean, the public has come to a point that they're now in a hurry to get some results made and achieved for them. So I therefore like to end this where it matters the most. And where does it matter the most? Implementation. So the government is committed to translating policy into action, measuring results, not intentions, engaging stakeholders continuously and holding itself accountable. I told the group that came to see me, and I said, I want us to get to a point in which on a regular basis, is it monthly, is it quarterly, I'm able to speak to the Nigerian people. And I said, this is what we've done. This is what we've done. And I think unless we get to that point, I don't think we'll be taken seriously. The question is no longer what is the policy. The question now is how do we deliver together? This event, for example, for me, is a call for partnership to business, to labor, to states, and to the Nigerian people. So in concluding, what I would say is that Nigeria's industrial future, just like that of other countries, will not be built by chance. No, it will not. It cannot. It will be built by deliberate policy. We now have one. It will be built by disciplined execution. That's our next move. And collective resolve. The NIP is our compass. Implementation, therefore, will become our test. Prosperity is what our destination would be, because it's about prosperity. Right? We've achieved stability. Right? Now is consolidation. But all of that lead to what? Lead to jobs, lead to prosperity. And I think that with all of you working with us, with the ministry, my hope is that the efforts we make today will count towards that prosperity. I thank everyone.
Congratulations, Honorable Minister, on the launch of the first ever national industrial policy. I congratulate you and I congratulate all of us as Nigerians and as stakeholders and for the many benefits inherent in the policy. Please make it very brief and short. Our day is almost gone. Quickly, go ahead.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and thanks for the minister. I think the most important thing here is actually driving down this narrative to the basis. And where are the bases? The MSMEs themselves. I would like the minister to work more with the BMOs, that's the Business Membership Organization. For you to actually get all this narrative corrected out there, you need all these people at the grass level to tell the Nigerian story the way it should be, not, of course, the elite. So like you said, you talked about the Nigerian factor has to do with Nigerians. For example, I'm a farmer, and here in Nigeria at the moment, I know what, in quote, the Chinese farmers are doing to us in Nigeria. Fish farmers are suffering. As of last year, everybody's actually trying to run out of the business. Why? Because the Chinese government or the Chinese farmers are taking advantage of what our own government is not doing for us. So please, I would like you to do more with the BMOs so that it will be easy for us to fight our battle ourselves and get the needs done. You will continue to, sorry, just last point. We're going to have our raw material being sent out, and I'll tell you why. The reason is because we don't have a body that take off from us directly. You will have the middlemen to come to the farmers and take the product from us. Now, I've borrowed money today a whole lot in terms of farming, probably like, let's say 1,000 hectares of sesame seed. Nobody is taking from me. But of course, I want the middleman to come, take it, and whatever I want to do with it, I don't care. All I care is just put money back in my pocket. So if the government or the trade minister can actually put something together where we have a forum whereby I, as a farmer, I'm 100% sure that whatever it is I'm doing, there's a segment of the government that is going to take from me directly. With that, then, of course, processing and adding value and all that to it will be simple. But without that, we'll still come back to what you said you're afraid of. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Off-takers, fine, and I think that's the much we can take. Thankfully, there's no other hand up. So on that note, I'd like to invite for closing remarks, Dr. Tayo Adelaju. Please put your hands together for it.
The Honorable Minister of State for Industry. So, Honorable Minister, I told my people last week that the Honorable Minister will be here on time. And he will be here and stay throughout. And when it's his time, he will give a disciplined execution of himself and his policy area. And I think my people can confirm that you are a minister in whom we are well pleased. The Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, my brother was talking about BMOs, NASIMA. Minister has engaged us in a very painful process in the last few months. The rigor of the process of just keeping us in the room throughout the process of thinking through the policy is why, that's the reason why we asked him to come and give this policy address. Honourable Minister, you have a commitment to the roundtables, because we understand that the implementation framework requires that execution does not happen at 32,000 feet. You have a commitment to the roundtables also on the industrial zones, because we know your passion for it. And remember the debates you had at FEC on it. Again, you have a commitment to make sure that that happens as it should. The interministerial coordination and platforms and forum we spoke about, you also have a commitment on it. We realize that if the private sector does not co-produce this with you, it will not happen. And so please accept our partnership to get this important work done. So thank you again, Honorable Minister. When we were designing this outlook, our intent was that if you as a Nigerian tuned in for about 4.5, 5 hours of your day, you would at least get clear economic policy forward guidance, monetary, fiscal, trade, industrial, and you got a sense that we truly are stabilizing and we can all move to consolidation. I hope that we have delivered. And if we have not, let us know through all our channels. But I think the message of the Honorable Minister is the message going home, as we thank all of you for coming, board members, distinguished members from the private sector, captains of industry, and all of you that have joined online and stayed with us, that this is about disciplined execution. There's no other way forward in consolidation. And this is about our collective resolve. No one from anywhere is coming to do this for us. So as I wish you a productive and prosperous 2026, ladies and gentlemen, let's get the work done. Thank you for coming.